Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars.
SoundCartel.
From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. There's so much you need to know and comply with when you run your own business. When it comes to the law, ignorance is no excuse. One law which can trip people up is consumer law, says business lawyer Tracey Mylecharane. So what is Australian consumer law and what kinds of businesses are affected? Tracey explains to Chris Ashmore.
The Australian consumer law is a set of rules that apply to any business, small or large, that sells products or services to Australian consumers. So that's just about every business.
Not just the big retailers.
Not just the big retailers. So the consumer law does apply to Harvey Norman, for example. If I buy a toaster and it's faulty, they do have to give me a new one. That is the classic consumer law example. But it also applies to you and I as service-based businesses and to the small product-based businesses that sell candles or prints or artwork. It applies to any business that sells products or services to Australian consumers.
And what does it cover exactly? Not just refunds?
Covers a whole host of things. Refunds is part of it, but it covers the way in which a business will deal with consumers, so members of the public. What are your terms and conditions? What are you selling, whether it's services or products? And what are your terms? Refund policies, warranties, rescheduling and cancellation for service-based businesses, payment terms. You often see when you go into a store or you're buying something online, a policy around whether I can get a refund for a change of mind. Some do, some don't, and that's okay, provided it's outlined in advance. There are some refund policies around things like if the services are defective. So if you haven't done it properly, if you or I don't do our job properly, Chris, we have to do it again. Or if somebody buys a physical product and it's defective, it doesn't do what it's supposed to, then the business will have an obligation to refund it. But it goes broader than that and it looks at all the ways that a business is going to engage or interact with that consumer.
Do you have an example or a scenario where a business might be in breach of consumer law?
The most common example is when a business does not provide their terms and conditions to consumers in advance of the consumer deciding to buy from them. For example, if that is a service-based business and let's say we're a creative interior designer, might send a proposal and the client will accept the proposal. So they send the invoice and then the invoice is paid and then they'll whip out some T's and C's and say, oh, by the way, here's our copyright protection and here's our cancellation policy. That is in breach of the consumer law because that business is not providing those terms and conditions along with the proposal so that that consumer has an opportunity to review and consider the terms and conditions before they decide to say yes.
We spoke about no refunds before, but can a business actually have a no refund or no return policy?
To an extent they can. They can if it's for change of mind. So they don't have to offer refunds or returns for a change of mind. But they do have to offer refunds or returns for a defective product or a defective service. So the example we touched on earlier, if I go into a store and purchase something and I get it home and realise that it's not made properly or it's defective, I take it back to the place I purchased it from and they must refund me. You can't contract out of that. So they can't have a blanket no refunds or returns. They can say, we only offer refunds and returns in accordance with our obligations under the consumer law, but they may not go beyond that. So just because you change your mind or because you got it home and you decided that yellow doesn't look good on your skin in that light, they don't have to change it for that reason.
Right. Are there other items that could be deemed unfair in a company's terms and conditions?
There are. I see it a lot where service-based businesses would like to lock people in for a fixed term. So let's say business coaches, they want to lock somebody into their program for 12 months, but somebody enters the program and after 2 weeks they decide that it's really not for them and they want to exit. And that business owner says, but you have to pay me for the full 12 months. It's a really fine line around what's appropriate and what's not and what's lawful and what's not. The takeaway is, though, that you can't charge for a service you haven't provided. So we need to look at it. So there's all different offerings and different courses, whether it's a mastermind, a program, a one-on-one coaching, depending on what it is that the consumer is buying will determine what clauses you're entitled to include in your T's and C's or in your terms and conditions. You can't be unfair and charge for something that you're not providing.
Right. But it's not so clear-cut though, is it?
No, it's not, is it? And you can hear from what I'm saying now that it becomes inherently complex, and we really need to deep dive in to understand what it is that a business is offering and then what terms are fair and lawful to attach to that offering. It can take some work to dive in and get it right, which is one of the many reasons why I say it's so important to get your legal documents tailored for your business, because otherwise you may be in error and you may not be protected and not complying with your consumer law obligations.
When it comes to marketing and advertising, there's a whole host of laws related to that, of course. But basically, in a nutshell, you can't mislead the customer. Is that right?
That's correct. You can't mislead or be deceptive in your marketing and advertising. You can't make promises that are untrue, and you can't lead people to believe that they're buying something when in fact they're buying something else.
And so is consumer law, is that there to protect the consumer?
Yes, it is. It is there to protect the consumer. But if a business complies properly with their obligations, that business also has protection too.
Because a consumer is not always right.
Absolutely. And we know that well. A consumer is not always right. And as a business, you need the peace of mind that you are going to be able to rely on your documents, your T's and C's, if and when you need to. And you get that peace of mind by complying with your obligations under the consumer law.
And what are the penalties for a business if it doesn't abide by the consumer law?
It varies. There can be some very significant monetary penalties, so some big hefty fines, but it all is determined by what's the consequence of the breach. So how long's a piece of string? I know it's that typical lawyer answer, but in this case it's quite appropriate, but it can be significant.
I suppose the most important takeout really is you should look at your documents and have the right legal documents in place.
That's right. As a business owner, you have the positive obligation to take steps to inform yourself of what your obligations are under the Australian consumer law, and you need to take steps to ensure that you meet those obligations. And part of that process will be obtaining the right legal advice and getting your documents tailored for your business so that you know that they serve your business and they cover what it is that you are doing or offering in your business.
That was lawyer Tracey Mylecharane. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow @BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.